Hello, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here for our October History Cafe, Seattle Hockey Legacies. I'm Sora, and I work in public programs here at MoHi. For our low to no vision audience members, I am a white and East Asian person with shoulder length brown hair. Well, actually, it's way longer than that now. Wearing a black sweater with white dots. A couple housekeeping notes. If you need a restroom, they're just beyond the deli case in the cafe on your left. And History Cafe as a series is presented in partnership with HistoryLink on the third Wednesday of every month. Today, we're gonna have about an hour discussion followed by a 30-minute Q&A. So please feel free to save your questions. If you need any pen or paper, I think we have some scrap paper in the back, if that helps. As we ground in this space, it's important to acknowledge that here at MoHi, we're on the historic and contemporary lands and waters of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and all Coast Salish people. Historically, Native communities were forcibly removed from this place, with lasting impacts on the land, water, and people. Therefore, it's important to hold deep respect and gratitude for their continued endurance and unbroken stewardship of this place. We encourage you to visit the websites of local tribes to learn more about the people whose land you're on. So to start with some introductions, I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm by no means a hockey expert, but I'm here to facilitate a really fun conversation between two really lovely people. And so directly to my right is Rachel Moody. She is a player on the Seattle Women's Hockey Club and an ambassador for the Women's Pro Hockey Seattle organization. And then, yay, I love it. Yay. And then to my even more right is Ian Parsons, and he is the great-grandson of the Seattle Metropolitan's founding owner, Joseph Patrick, kind of part of some hockey royalty, if you will. So we're in for a great discussion tonight, so thank you all for being here. Great. Yeah. And as we get started, I guess I'd like to ask each of you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your connection to Seattle hockey. So whoever wants to start.
I'm next to you. I'll start. So for low vision friends, I am a white woman with shoulder length, actual shoulder length, light brown hair. I am wearing a floral skirt and a black t-shirt with the Women's Pro Hockey Seattle logo on it. I've been in Washington State for about 5 years. I got associated with the Women's Pro Hockey Seattle group in 2021. I've been a hockey fan since I was about 12 years old, though, and it's just kind of been slowly taking over my life since I moved up here. I started playing hockey about a year ago, and yeah, it's kind of become an obsession. If I'm not working at my job that pays the bills, I'm doing something related to hockey pretty much.
Well, okay, I am a white male, receding, or gray hair. And I'm wearing a maroon sweater, but it is not like the Montreal Maroons. But my tie to hockey is that I've always been surrounded by hockey in my family. My mom's parents were, or my mom's grandparents were the founders of the hockey, and then all of her uncles were involved in hockey teams and some of the greatest players out of Canada. And so it's just, there's always just been hockey around and always stories about the people in hockey and about all the early teams, so.
Very cool. And in that vein, can you tell me a little bit about your family's entry into the hockey world?
Okay, so the Patrick family started out in Quebec, and they played hockey out there. And my great-grandfather started a lumber company that moved across northern Canada and ended up in Nelson, where they were very active in the lumber industry plus hockey. And so all the boys and the girls all played hockey. And then when they sold the lumber business, my great-grandfather moved to Victoria. And Lester and Frank, the two eldest boys, really put pressure on the great-grandfather on their own father to invest in hockey, and so they built, first of all, I think, an arena in Victoria, and then one in Vancouver after that, and then a couple years later in Seattle. And those were some of the first artificial ice in North America. Those, especially, they were the two first artificial ice in Canada. And then they started building teams, and then started an entire hockey league on the West Coast, following the rules that Leicester, they had played professional back in Ontario, and Leicester was actually, the one picture you can see the inside of the cup, and that's where the Wanderers won in 1907, and it is the biggest inscription on the cup, and they have all the players' names listed in the very center of the cup, and and the team that they beat, which was, I think, was Kelowna. And they won the cup then. And so they were all playing very antiquated rules in those days compared to today. But when they started their own league out here, they were able to create new rules to try to make it more exciting, sort of like what the NHL did, or NFL did, that they created forward passing by adding blue lines, and then making a rule that you couldn't pass across two of them, but you could pass forward, and it just made the game that much faster and that much more exciting. And so the West Coast hockey was the most exciting hockey in those days. And it took the NHA, which became the NHL, several years to adopt the rules that were created by the Patrick brothers to make the game more fun, because these guys way out in the hinterlands were winning Stanley Cups. Seattle won one, Victoria won one, and so did Vancouver. And
Yeah. I guess, could you tell us a little bit more about the birth of the Metropolitans and give us a little bit of a sense of the time period? It's the early 20th century.
yeah.
What is the growth of that look
so
like?
the Pacific, I think the Pacific Coast Hockey Association started about 1915. Is that right? Yeah. About 1915 with the Seattle, with the Vancouver, Victoria, and a few other teams. I think the Seattle team came about 1916 was when they came about, and they built their famous arena that was one of the biggest hockey arenas in the country, where the IBM building is standing now. And it had artificial ice, and the Patricks decided that they wanted to be a winning team, so they went to northern, I think it was Ontario, and found a really, really good team and bought all the players. They then brought them to Seattle, and their first year they had a better than average year, and their second year was the year that they won the Stanley Cup. And they kept a lot of their original players throughout the majority of their life, and many of the players even ended up retiring after the sport to the Seattle area. And then in 1919 was the year of the great pandemic, and the Seattle team was playing Montreal again, like we did 2 years previously. And Seattle being a West Coast port city, was exposed to the flu a lot earlier than like Montreal. Montreal was a very kind of closed society. They had a port, but it wasn't open to anything other than straight to England. So they really weren't dealing with different diseases that were coming through. So Seattle had early versions of the Great Spanish Flu. And so the people in Seattle were, we got a version that was not as deadly at the beginning, so made a lot of them immune. So when the big pandemic struck again, was during the playoffs, and the majority of the Montreal players ended up in the hospital and were unable to furnish a team. Matter of fact, even one of their players died of the pandemic. But because they couldn't furnish a team, they were willing to forfeit, and my great uncle Frank refused to accept the forfeit because did not think that that was fair to the fans or to the players. And so that is the only year that there was a tie. Even though Seattle was up, I think, 2-1 or something in the playoffs, that they refused to accept the forfeit. So that year, both teams and their players were listed on the cup. One of the neat things about the Stanley Cup is that when you win, not only do you get your winning score and who you defeated on there, but you also get to list all of your players. And so it was super cool that they decided to do that. So it's like in one of the upper parts below the main bowl, it's got the listing of both teams of Montreal and Seattle. And so the only time there was a tie that we really won.
Love that. And around the same time, kind of as this first Seattle pro team is on the rise, we see a jump also or kind of the emergence of women's hockey as well.
Yes. So around that same time in 1917, we had the first Seattle women's hockey team, and it was actually the wives of players on the men's team. And they would play their games during the intermissions of the men's games. Sorry, microphone. So they would have 2 little 10-minute games during the intermissions, and then at the end of the game, they would play a 15-minute game. That same year, 1917, was also the first girls' competition. It was the Seattle Metettes against the Glacials. The Metettes won a whole whopping 1-0. One of the pictures in the thing there is a photo of a newspaper clipping from that, and I have it on my phone. There was a quote we really liked that we wanted to read, but it's a little hard to read on the paper. So. This was referring to the girls' championship, not the women's game. But it's amazing to think that this was written in 1917. Girls are not afraid of anything nowadays, it seems. They do practically all the boy does in the way of sports. Their endurance seems to be equal, if not greater, and with determination and enthusiasm, the boys will have to look to their laurels if they are to keep ahead. That is what a number of girls in this city have been doing this winter, playing hockey just like the boys and men. We thought that was kind of cool, from 1917. And then one of the other pictures floating around is from 1920. I think actually the photo was from 1920, but then in 1921 was the first ever international women's ice hockey competition right here in Seattle. And it was between the Seattle Vamps. You'll see them in the picture. They're playing in these big woolen skirts. You would not catch me on the ice in a woolen skirt, no way. And they played against the Victoria Kewpies and the Vancouver Amazons. So, yeah, but it was the first international ice competition. The Vamps did not do so incredibly hot, but they were there. Vancouver won the tournament undefeated. So that was the first ever. And then the Vamps disbanded, unfortunately, after 1921. Oh, and Frank Patrick was the coach of the Vamps too. So his family continues to be entwined all across.
The Patricks were all gung-ho. They were, not looking for equality and all that. They were looking to fill their arena. They wanted as many events that used the arenas as possible because it helped cover the costs of maintaining these big facilities. Especially, I bet making ice in those days was not cheap. So. But it was fun because it made hockey a lot more open to the entire community because it was, they even encouraged youth sports and everything. It wasn't, you had some of that in baseball and all that, but it was like something was really special about the whole, the hockey world that it created. And that's one reason why hockey is so big on the East Coast. Because it's a winter indoor sport that is fast and just sort of gives everybody, a chance to, be together and play and have a good time.
There was also a UW women's team at the time?
Oh, yes, that's correct. In 1920, there was a UW women's team. I am not sure what year that disbanded. But then fast forward many years later, and there is now another UW women's team that just had their inaugural season in 2021. Yeah.
Very cool.
My club actually plays against them quite a lot, the Seattle Women's Hockey Club. We actually have a couple games coming up this month, and they're free. Just saying.
Yes.
Just saying.
Where do y'all play?
We play at the Kraken Community Iceplex in Northgate, so where the Kraken do their training.
Nice. Yeah. Going back to kind of a little bit earlier in the 20th century, I think Seattle has a really big claim to fame in the Stanley Cup victory. Could you tell us a little bit about the 1917 team?
Well, 1917 was the very first American team ever to win the Stanley Cup. Before then, it had always been won by Canadian teams. And the majority of the teams on the East Coast were Canadian. And I'm trying to remember, I think there was only one or two American teams at that point in the NHA. And, but, we had Seattle and then a couple other smaller cities out here. But Seattle was the dominant one for that. So it was also the very first time the Stanley Cup was won outside of Eastern North America.
If you go see a Kraken game, they have a banner hanging in the rafters.
With their candy stripe
Yeah.
colors, which you have to say it's probably one of the most gaudy. But I think their thing was, we want everyone to notice us, that we're standing out. Everybody else was primarily single or maybe two colors, but like with the Metropolitans, they just had their gigantic S. And then they had all, the blue, white, and green stripes. And I'm sure it was very it caught everybody's eye when they first would come onto the ice.
Nice. Yeah, and so kind of after that win, and we see the rise of these teams, and then kind of as we approach the mid-century, there's kind of a lull, and it seems kind of with the dissolution of the Metropolitans and the kind of crumbling or the replacement of the ice arena. And yeah, curious kind of how that came about and what were the impacts?
Well, okay, to the best of my knowledge, what happened is that the city of Seattle decided that they wanted to build their own arena, and Seattle, the Seattle Metropolitan Arena, which was where the IBM building is, in the middle of the Metropolitan track, which was state-of-the-art when it was built, was actually getting pretty old. It was pretty small for its size by that time. But what happened is that the city of Seattle was building their new arena, and they talked the University of Washington into not renewing the lease on the Patrick Arena. And so the Seattle Metropolitan team ended up disbanding at that point because they didn't see the purpose of having a professional hockey team if they didn't own their own venue. And so when the Seattle Arena opened up, I think they then, not long afterwards, junior hockey teams and semi-pro teams started to play in Seattle. But the Seattle team disbanded, and I think a bunch of the players were reallocated to other teams in the Pacific Coast Hockey Association. And some of them might have also been sold to, which was now the NHL had just started about a year earlier.
And on the women's side, there wasn't a whole lot going on in Seattle hockey for women until the 70s. In 72, there's a picture floating around, the North King Amateur Hockey Association got formed. It was a singular team. That was around until like the 80s. It eventually splintered off into a couple of different leagues. One of them which is the Snow King League, which is very well established here now. In the 80s, we also got the Seattle Wave, and they were broken into two levels. You had the Seattle Wave, that was the more like advanced team, and then the Seattle Orcas was a more like novice beginner team. Long story short, they had a few name changes over the years, but then in '97 ultimately became the Seattle Women's Hockey Club, which we still have today. We have 14 teams this season, just over 200 players. But yeah, between the 20s and the 70s, there wasn't a whole lot going on until we got more modern.
And there were in the youth and amateur realm, though. Were there other teams as well?
You might know more about Seattle than I do. I know for girls, the ones that I'm familiar with started in, the big one for the girls started in the 90s. The Washington Wild started in the 90s. That's a cool one because they are still the first and only all girls program. Most other programs are co-ed, but Washington Wild is exclusively just for girls. So nowadays, there's quite a few different programs. Snow King has girls and co-ed programs. The Kraken Lake, of course, has tons of youth and kids programs. But I am not aware of any kids programs that were happening again between the 20s and the 70s, unless you just know more than I do,
like
right?
in the 60s and 70s, we had, there was there was a North Seattle League, there was an East Side Hockey Association, there was one out of Burien. Trying to remember what league they would have been, because they only had like one or two teams in every age group there. But the East Side Hockey Association, which had 2 arenas in Bellevue up until 77, when they both got torn down. One because the Seattle arena, or the Bellevue arena, was falling in on itself, and the Crossroads Ice Arena was turned into an indoor mall, which was horrible because it was an indoor mall that was empty when they finally finished it. And the area where the ice arena was you could still see where the boards had been, and it took them like another 10 years before they ended up finishing that. And then that all morphed into the Snow King. So starting in the very late 70s, early 80s, Snow King came to rise, and they built a big arena up in North Kirkland. I think they also had one in Snohomish County somewhere at one point. And then now they've got one down in Renton.
And Snoqualmie.
But hockey was always popular. It wasn't as popular as the other sports because there wasn't as many places to play. So if you had easy access to it, a lot of people were involved in it, in that reason. So,
Makes sense.
yeah.
And just generally speaking, too, it's an expensive sport to play. So sometimes
It
there's
is.
financial barriers, because other sports like, basketball or soccer, you really just need a basketball or a soccer ball, and then as many kids as you can get can play. But, hockey, you've got to have the gear. Everyone has to have a stick. You got to have some ice. So yeah, that's a little bit of a barrier
Zamboni.
sometimes
Yeah.
too. Oh, you gotta love the Zamboni.
Well, you could just play in the street like in
No,
Wayne's World.
We need Zambonis, Ian.
So we've gotten kind of a picture of the wide, like a long arc of kind of what the scene was like over different points in time and its ebb and flow. And I was wondering if y'all could talk a little bit about kind of the specific innovations, not just in gameplay, but in like bracketing and how, kind of the mechanics of the industry that allowed for great popularity.
Yeah, okay, so one of the great things that the Patrick brothers, I think it was Frank, came up with this idea was quite often you would have the very best team of the league would be the winner. And then to play for the Stanley Cup, quite often the best team would play the previous year's champion and to win the cup. Well, the Patrick brothers, including Frank, came up with a great idea. Well, why don't we create a playoffs, but not just playoffs, but an entire season of playoffs, and which became known as the second season, which was, would usually take place for about a month and a half at the end of the regular season, where all the good teams were kept, and all the and then they would cut out like the bottom quarter of the teams would no longer be playing that year, and then they could hike the prices because now everybody got to see better hockey, and they would then play, and then the people that had the best score at the end of the second season would then be able to play in a short playoff, and then that team would then play the other league for the Stanley Cup. And so that was quickly adopted by also the NHA, which saw all the money that could generate, and that the game was better at that point too. And so they adopted the playoff structure, and they also adopted all the forward passing rules. The Patricks also put what was it? It was putting numbers on the jerseys. And so they did a lot of things that you see in almost all other sports now, is something that they created to try to make a better product for people to enjoy.
So there aren't too many innovations to women's hockey that started here, but there's still a few interesting points to just talk about. And some of this kind of mirrors
Yeah.
the men.
Yeah.
So before this started, I was saying it's crazy to think that the original couple of women's teams in the 20s only had 7 skaters total. Total 7 skaters and then your goalie. But now teams have 23. So back then, you didn't have lines, you didn't have benchmates that you could swap roles with when you were tired. You just kept playing and God help you. So it's, now, and then it's the same for both the Women's
an
Pro League and
endurance.
the NHL. Yeah. So everyone has 23 members, and so you have line mates and you can change lines and do all that sort of thing. And of course, one of the huge differences with women is, I mentioned the wool skirts earlier, gear has changed tremendously. So we're not wearing wool skirts out there anymore. Women are wearing full gear. There's actually still some challenges on kind of both sides of the size spectrum. Super petite women a lot of times end up wearing like youth or junior sizes, and then plus size women usually have to end up wearing men's sizes. Just this year, actually, CCM, which is one of the big hockey brands, came out with a women's line, which is a fabulous step in the right direction. But they're what you would call like straight sizes in the fashion industry. So like I don't fit in them. So I still wear men's gear. Oh, there we go. There's the skirts. Yeah. Yep. And helmets. Thank God for helmets. Yeah, so it's definitely going in the right direction, but even now the women's gear is not quite to the same, available extent that the men's gear is. There's one brand based in Canada called Stark that has more like curvature, shall we say, built into their gear for women's bodies. But otherwise, yeah, we're doing what we can with squeezing into men's stuff. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the company that makes the new gear, or how any players that might have been involved in that creation?
Oh, I don't know names or anything. I know they did consult with actual women who play hockey to kind of see, like, what do you want in your gear? What are the biggest and sometimes literal pain points with your gear? I don't have specific names if they consulted with pros or, maybe local players that they, family members or whatnot. But I know they did actually work with women hockey players to make stuff more tailored to women's bodies.
Very
So,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about these innovations that kind of, resonate in hockey today.
Yeah, no. And it's
Yeah.
great gear. Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm curious about kind of the individual characters within this, part of why people love sports so much is the individual people, the stars that make it exciting, or, the coaches and people that mean a lot to them in their personal experience. So kind of along the spectrum of amateur to professional, spectator, player. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about some people and organizations that have meant something to you, or stories and tidbits that you have to share.
Can you start?
Yeah, why don't
Cool. So for me personally, I grew up watching men's hockey because that's all there was on TV. The first time I saw women play was actually just a few years ago. The Instagram, gosh, I keep hitting the poor microphone. The Instagram algorithm got me and showed me that there was this Seattle Women's Hockey Club playing this brand new UW Women's Hockey Club, and I was like, oh my God, there's women playing hockey. So I went to go watch it and was literally sitting there crying. I'm like, I've never seen women play hockey. This is amazing. So again, no like specific players or anything. It was just fact that I was in my 30s seeing women on the ice for the first time, just losing my mind like a crazy person. But yeah, no, some cool women we have in the organization right now. I wanted to kind of give shout outs to the Kraken organization in particular. They've made history a couple times. A couple years ago, was it back 2020, 2021? They hired Cami Granado. She was the first ever female professional scout for the NHL. She's moved on to the Canucks now. She's the general assistant manager, I believe, for the Vancouver Canucks. And then just this season, we made history with Jessica Campbell, first ever female bench coach. So getting to see her on TV in the first regular season game last week was really, really cool. My whole social media feed was just blowing up. Oh my gosh, Jessica Campbell. So yeah, those are two names I will remember for a long time. And the other couple of names I wanted to bring up, one of them is the gal who founded our group, Pure Women's Pro Hockey Seattle, Zoe Harris, and her partner, Cindy Daly. We could probably have our own talk just about everything they've done and all of their impact in the hockey world, just absolutely amazing. Like Zoe is the first woman in Washington to win a couple of awards. Like she was the first woman to win the, oh gosh, there's so many abbreviations. I'm probably going to mix this up slightly. Sorry, but like the Collegiate Hockey Coach Associate Award. But yeah, so she's won some coaching awards, and both Zoe and Cindy are actually in the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto for being the first women to coach a men's collegiate hockey team here in Washington. So their fingerprints are all over the Washington hockey community. So I'll stop there for a moment and let you go.
Okay. Okay. I just don't know where to go from this though. But anyways, you know, just I was always interested in hockey, and even after, you know, everything, but Seattle had a lot of great support for their junior hockey teams. And so we all, you know, I think back in the 70s, it was the Totems. And then from the Totems, we went to the Breakers. Then from the Breakers, they became the T-Birds, I'm trying to remember? Or was there another one in between? Anyways, but then, and now we have the T-Birds, and they play in Kent, not Seattle, but it's a much better arena for them because it's a little bit smaller. But it's I as a kid I just always enjoyed going to the junior hockey, and then luckily we had the Canucks up the hill, up in Vancouver. The Canucks for a long time were having one of their preseason games would always be played in the Seattle area, and they would usually be playing the LA Kings. And for a lot of it was down at the Tacoma Dome. And so we'd get to go there and see NHL hockey, which was a lot of fun. And I don't know,
I didn't know there was ever ice in the Tacoma Dome. That's cool.
well, you know, with artificial, you could if you got a big enough chiller, you could put ice anywhere.
There you go.
So, because the Tacoma Dome is designed to do anything. The Sonics played there for a long time too. While the Seattle arena was being rebuilt, they went down there and they played there, I think, for one season, and then like another season or a half a season they played there. I remember. It's very fuzzy going back that far. But then there was also the season that they did the Kingdome, which was great. $5 ticket. You're sitting out in the 100 yards away from the court. Can't even see the ball, but for $5 and you got binoculars, going like, hey, I'm at a playoff game for the NBA and it only cost me $5. You can't tell who wins because the scoreboard's so far away you can't even read it. So, but we've always made do with subpar facilities here in the Seattle area, and we still enjoy it and still put on a good show. So.
Yeah. And speaking of good show, I guess going back to the question of kind of people and things that stood out for you that may make the game exciting, and maybe for you, Ian, some family history. Could you tell me a little bit about kind of more recent, maybe mid-century family history?
Okay, well, let's see. Well, one thing that's really cool is that when the Pacific Coast Hockey League collapsed and was absorbed by the NHL, that my great uncles all went off to NHL teams, and Lester went to the New York Rangers and became the head coach, the manager of the team. And in 1928 playoffs, their goalie got injured and they did not have a backup goalie because he was in the hospital for something. I was either sick or injured. And so they didn't have a backup goalie. Well, the NHL allowed you to go into the stands to get a backup player. As long as the other team acquiesced. Well, the other team might have been Toronto, I think it was the Maple Leafs maybe? Well, whoever the other team was, they said no. And so the New York Rangers had no goalie, and they had nobody on their bench. So at the age of 42, Lester Patrick put on the pads and played goalie for 1.5 periods. Did not allow any scoring, and then all the local papers were, had on their sports headlines that the Silver Fox saved the day. And going like, 'cause that was his nickname because he was very tall, very handsome with silver hair. And so that was super, super cool. And then Frank was involved in the launching of a lot of other franchises, like the St. Louis Blues, and I think he had a hand in the Blackhawks in their early days. And so he was much more of a manager of organizations. And so that's what he focused on. And then cousin Craig, who was general manager of the Penguins for many. Oh, sorry. He was the general manager of the Penguins, and the coach died 2 years in a row, and he took over at the end of the season and took them through to the playoffs. And in 1991 and 1992, they won 2 straight Stanley Cups. And that was where some pictures that are on there were my cousin Craig brought the Stanley Cup all the way to Victoria for a family reunion. But they did not have a keeper of the cup in those days. And so we couldn't leave it in the hotel room. So we had to set it on a street corner while we're waiting for the light and lean against it. And people would come up to us and say, "Hey, where'd you get the copy of the Stanley Cup?" We're like, no, it's the real one. Well, what's it be doing here? I'm like, well, it's not the first time it's been here. The cup was in Victoria, in 1925, when they last won the cup. But so it was just hilarious. But we had to haul it around everywhere, and let's see. But anyways, Craig was able to bring it out here because he had to take it to the jeweler to put a new ring on. So he, very luckily, usually when the new rings are put on, then they offset the first year of the next ring so that you have, that it starts in the same location. Well, what they did was they put the Penguins 2 wins, one above the other, when they got it engraved, just to make it that much easier. And it normally was something nobody ever thought about. But then it was the only time that it was won back to back with a ring change. So.
Great stuff.
One other thing. I didn't learn this from the family. I actually learned it by watching the Stanley Cup playoffs a couple years ago. But Lynn Patrick, who was one of Lester's sons, and he had 2 sons that were that were very successful in the NHL. Him and Muzz. And Lynn, anyways, during one summer when the Stanley Cup was not kept at the Hockey Hall of Fame, there was not one. So instead, the winning team got to keep the cup over the summer. So Lester brought it all the way back to Victoria and put it in his basement. Well, Lynn was looking at it and going like, well, I've got lots of relatives on the cup. He goes, I can't wait till I can have my name on the cup. And then he started thinking and said, hey, there's a nail. And he took a nail and he etched his name in the cup. And then when, I guess, Lester found out, he got really, really mad, punished him. They had to take it back to a jeweler where they had to melt some silver and fill in the holes and then rebuff it so it didn't show up. But Lynn ended up in 68 or 58, something, maybe 1958. He was on a Stanley Cup winning team where his dad was the coach, and he ended up getting his name on the cup. And he's the first person to be put on the cup twice and have it listed only once.
Love it. Yeah. Well, kind of thinking about now we have the Kraken. Mm-hmm. And so kind of thinking about this now great time of growth in Seattle, what impacts have you two felt around that in your respective kind of relationships to hockey?
It's definitely helped grow the women's hockey community. In 2021, the Seattle Women's Hockey Club had 7 teams, and now this year we have 14. So it's literally doubled. And then I know just in general, it's made a huge difference. Like there's more girls enrolled. I cannot recall the year off the top of my head, but I read a study. Oh, you know what it was? It was when I have to do a little bit of explaining. So currently, the professional women's team is in their second season, but there used to be a different professional women's team. And when they debuted in like 2019, the number of girls registered to play hockey in the Pacific Northwest jumped by like 62%. So you can definitely see that just like the more exposure to hockey and the more that girls are able to see themselves, on the ice, on TV, on YouTube. A lot of the women's professional games do a really great job of being streamed on YouTube. We can see those numbers just climbing and climbing and climbing. So it's been really cool. And the Kraken themselves have expanded it too. They absorbed an existing league when they started their Kraken League and then expanded it. They've got dozens of adult teams, co-ed and women's. They've got dozens of youth programs. And then there's also a thing, this isn't unique to the Kraken, I just think it's cool, so I'm bringing it up. But like the Kraken and Snow King do Try Hockey for Free events where girls and women, we also do one for women, can come and try it out for free. Because like we were saying, gear's kind of pricey, so it's not something you necessarily want to jump into having not tried it, but so that you can come and people donate their gear for the afternoon, so that way people can see what it feels like to have the gear on and to use a stick and to play with the puck, but then they can decide like, hey, you want to sign up, or how you feeling, what do you think? So I love those programs. There was actually just a Kraken Girls Try Hockey for Free event on Sunday just this past week.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's great about Seattle getting it back was that my mom has always been very proud of the hockey heritage and all that, and so she's always been a big proponent of it. And so whenever the NHL would send the cup to Seattle, somehow we would finagle to have private time with the cup. It was really, really nice. And so when the ownership group was trying to get a franchise, they contacted my mother, and Todd Leiweke had multiple meetings with her and to sort of learn about the history of Seattle hockey and try to build it into their presentation to the NHL. And when they finally made their formal presentation in where was that? In Sea Island in Georgia, the ownership group flew my parents out to the event, and that's like, there's a picture, one of the pictures is of my mom with a young girl hockey player, and they're holding the number 32 jersey, which stands for the 32nd franchise. And that was at that event. And my mom was able to also see a distant cousin of ours, Dick Patrick, who is the managing owner of the Capitals, which I don't know if that picture made it through on here, but it's just quite an amazing picture, only because you can see how big the Patrick boys were. My mom's, I think now about 5'4". She's 89 years old now. She was probably 86 or 85 in the picture that might be on there. But he is like 6'7", and it's just like he's going the height difference, and just going like the Patrick boys were all known for just being extremely tall and very athletic. So anyway, it was fun. That was my first real inkling, because I've seen pictures of the Patrick men being around other hockey players, and it doesn't really stand out that much, but against real people. It's like, and so it was very nice. My mom was part of the presentation, and she was there for a bunch of the pictures, and so, and the ownership group was really gracious, and she had no idea who any of them were besides Todd Leiweke, that she had only met through all the meetings, but because he was the big Seattle guy, but Jerry Bruckheimer and all the other Hollywood people that were like involved. She just said they all just seemed really nice, though. It's like
Oh, one other thing I would be remiss not to mention about just the growth of hockey in general over the past few years is the Pride Association, the Seattle Pride Hockey Organization. They have a tournament every summer, and as of this past one, June 2024, it's the biggest Pride LGBT hockey tournament in the whole world. Lot of fun, but I just popped in my head. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot to mention the Pride folks, because we have a picture of that in there too.
Yeah. So what is the tournament like? I mean, because I think maybe you didn't or did win something?
I maybe possibly was on one of the winning teams. Yeah. so there's winners for each division, and my team won the novice division, which basically means I was lucky and was on a very good team because I can't take much credit for that. But no, it was a really great time. There were, if I remember correctly, 4 divisions, like novice, lower intermediate, upper intermediate, and then advanced, which are like the very fast, fancy people. It's 3 days. There were like 300 participants. It was a blast. The jerseys are gorgeous. Next time it comes up, you'll have to see. And they name all of the teams for notable people in LGBT history. So like my team was Laverne's Legends after Laverne Cox. There's usually teams named after like Harvey Milk, for example. So it's all very inclusive and it's just a lot of fun. It's more of a friendly competition. I mean, it is a competition. There's still somebody who gets to hoist a trophy at the end, but it's much more, it's like laid back. It's just about community, and everyone's just really, really happy to be there. I've only competed in a few competitions or a few tournaments so far because I haven't been playing myself very long, but hands down my favorite tournament so far. And then this summer, Pride also had like a regular season for the first time. I was able to play with them over the summer too. We played at the Kirkland Snow King rink. So hopefully that'll be able to come back. They had tried to get something going for fall, and there just literally wasn't ice time. Like, we need some more ice rinks in the area because everything's all booked up. So hopefully that organization can keep growing too, and we can offer more ice time through the Pride League too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So kind of, I guess as we start to wind down, what are both of your hopes for the future of Seattle hockey?
Well, as you may have guessed, we would like a pro team. Spoiler alert. Yeah, no, ideally, it would be so great to have pro teams out here. And of course, it can't just be us. So what we really need is like a West Coast contingent, right? Because we've got 6 teams on the East Coast. Right now, the current professional women's organization has 6 teams on the East Coast. So what we'd love is for them to expand out here and maybe have a Seattle team, a Portland team, a Vancouver team, Denver, so that way there can be people that can play here on the West Coast, and then, eventually have tournaments, kind of like we were saying, maybe do the best of the West versus the best of the East type of thing. That would be amazing. And then as an organization too, so right now we're a not-for-profit. We've talked about, hey, maybe someday we become a nonprofit and start offering scholarships to girls and women in the area. So yeah, there's some long-term stuff we would love to see happen, and we're just kind of excited to be here for all of it.
Yeah. And what I would love to see is just more ice sheets. That we just need a lot more rec facilities with ice all over the Puget Sound area, just to allow, as people get more and more excited about Kraken, that both boys and girls and adults can play hockey. Because the more people that play hockey, the more excited people get. And, this is the way it is in, all of Canada and the East Coast of the, East Coast of the United States, all the way to like Chicago and Minnesota, is that, there's ice arenas everywhere. Everybody plays hockey. One of the things that really made it possible to get the Kraken here, not just that the NHL wanted to have a team here ever since the early 70s, but being that we have so many young techies have moved here from other parts of the country. Many of them are rabid hockey fans from, Boston and Chicago and Minnesota and all the other great hockey cities. And they've come here and they love hockey. And so we need to have ice arenas so that they and their kids can play hockey, and that it will just keep exploding in growth, just due to availability. Because we've always had a shortage of ice arenas here in the Seattle area.
Yeah. It's really expensive, and there's a lot of
It is.
barriers to access, and hope that we can see more funding for
Mm-hmm.
recreation and arts and all the things that make life fun.
Indeed.
So those
Mm-hmm.
are kind of the questions that I had pre-prepared. Do you think there's anything you want to say before we open up for Q&A?
I'm good for Q&A.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be kind.
Sweet. Okay, yeah, we can run some wireless mics.
No roughing?
Yeah.
Fight
No
for
one-
fighting.
unless you brought your padding. So we'll come around. Go ahead and raise your hands. I think my colleague Rachel will come see you. I think we have a question up here. Actually, maybe I don't need to go up. Maybe we'll just sit here.
This is the question about women in hockey. And this is my ignorance, but how long have women played like in the Olympics, and how did the Olympics impact hockey and the women's scene? Did you?
That is a great question, and I did not research the Olympics at all. I don't know. Do you know?
I think women's hockey came about, was it in the 80s? Trying to remember?
I'd have to look. I'm sorry, I don't know. That is a
I,
good question, though.
I remember it being introduced. I just can't remember when. But I'm going like, well, that makes sense.
Well, I guess that's for me.
Yes.
That's like my.
Yay!
1998, okay.
Isn't that the
Yeah.
women's?
Well, anything
inaugural-
before the beginning of the pandemic gets fuzzy.
Thanks, Alicia.
Yeah.
You said that they tore down the arena that your family had put up,
Yes.
and then the
Well-
city did their own.
Well, yeah, so the city decided to build their own arena because the city saw that it was a way to make money and that to have control over its its events and all that. And so they started building it, and it was finished, I think, in 1926. And that was the arena that they just tore down a couple years ago, after several remodelings. But, so then they didn't tear down the arena itself, the Seattle arena, but the Patrick family lost the lease to it, because the University of Washington owned the land. And so instead, it was leased to the Olympic Hotel, which was just being finished at that point, and was used as a parking garage, and they didn't tear they removed the ice arena portion of it, but they didn't remove the structure itself until the early 1960s when the IBM building was built.
Was the Seattle arena that they built, was that financially successful for the city?
I'm sure it was, because it lasted all the way until they had junior hockey leagues playing in there and a bunch of everything else. But, it kept in operation straight up until the World's Fair. Then it was turned into a venue for the World's Fair. After the World's Fair was over, they then, that's where a bunch of junior hockey moved back into it until the Coliseum was built in the old U.S. Pavilion. That was the old Key Arena building, or whatever it's now called, Climate Pledge. That was originally the U.S. Pavilion for science. And then when the World's Fair was over, they came up with the idea. They dug down, then they built a hockey and a basketball arena. And then the Sonics remodeled it again into Key Arena, where they dug a little bit deeper. And then the Kraken came in, and they just dug straight to China until, and then they said, well, you know what? So what if it takes 15 minutes to get above ground? They'll survive the fire. It's okay. But it's a beautiful facility, actually. But it's amazing because they barely kept the legs that hold the roof up, and they just went straight down and built a massive structure. So I'm glad that they kept the original design of the roof, because I think it's just so iconic. But yeah, but the arena was very, very successful over all those years, and it was a monstrosity by the time they tore it down. Apparently, when they were tearing it down, because I remember seeing on the news that there was a brick front that was put on the front of it for the World's Fair, because they wanted to make all the buildings look modern. And when they demoed the front brick right around the front doors, there was all these gargoyles around where the front door area was, inside this brick wall. And people started saying, oh, we need to look into this. And City of Seattle quickly issued a command to the demolition contractor that everything had to be down by the end of business. And they demoed it all, and all the gargoyles and all the fancy decorations from the front of the building were completely destroyed before anybody could really get pictures of it or anything. Because the City of Seattle decided that that was going to become part of the expanded Opera House, and nothing was going to get in the way of that. And being that historical designations don't really apply to city properties. So there was no way to really do anything, which is kind of too bad, but it's like, I guess it's the price of progress. But, because we also destroyed the beautiful music hall and a bunch of the old movie houses that were downtown too, so.
Okay, how many years do you think it will take for the Stanley Cup to return?
Well, it depends. No, I think that, I think we have a good ownership group. It's going to take time to build, but it could, I can see it happening in, within the next 5 to 10 years, maybe sooner. Before we win the World Series? Yeah, before we,
Probably.
The Mariners just always get that close. They just get that, and then we trade off all the good players. So it's, the Kraken have not necessarily been like that. They've actually been pretty good at collecting talent. And they seem to be a nice hands-off management where they allow the hockey people to play hockey. So, but it all depends on if they start getting some financial problems, or if, those are the things that always seem to mess up these mid-market teams. But so far, so good.
Hey, if they keep playing like they played last
Yeah.
night, 7 goals from 7 different players, not too shabby.
Hello, I have a question here from one of our live stream viewers.
Okay.
They want to know if any of the Patrick family women played in any of the women's leagues.
Yes. Well, okay. So like when they were in Nelson, all my grandmother and my great aunts all played. Dora Patrick was probably the best player, and she was an imposing, like 5'8". She was a very, very statuesque woman, but she was also known as like a terror on the ice. And my grandmother, not so much. And Cinda was also a good player, from what I remember. But Dora was the really big one. And there was a lot of hockey being played up in Nelson. Because I don't know if you've ever been there. Nelson's a beautiful place, way up there, by the Alberta border. But it's also the middle of nowhere. And so that you're in the middle of the woods harvesting lumber. The only thing you have to do in the winter is play hockey. And so, yes, they were very big hockey players, and they allowed women's hockey in. They encourage women's hockey in all of their arenas, from what I understand.
And I have a second question for Ian. Somebody wants to know if you played for Snow King when you were young.
I played for Eastside, right up until Eastside imploded when they ran out of rinks. And then my mom made me quit because she said, I'm not driving you up to Linwood 4 times a week. Even though she went to the curling club 2 times a week, which wasn't that much farther. But of course, it's different because she was the adult and she had the car.
Love to leave a little awkward silence. What do you think? Anybody? Well, I guess seeing no more questions. Thank you all so much for coming. This has been a really great night. Thank you very much to our speakers. You were both so lovely and really fun to work with. So.
You as
Thank you. We had fun.
And before you leave, we have a great display table of things from the Seattle Metropolitans, some bobbleheads, some jerseys, and then also from the Seattle Women's Pro Hockey Club.
Yeah, I brought just kind of my personal collection of jerseys. They all say Moody on the back, so don't be taking my jerseys. But yeah, I just brought the jerseys I have that are for the women's teams I play for, and then I also brought a Kraken one. And then we have a bunch of stickers on the table back there. We have a bunch of Women's Pro Hockey Seattle stickers. Please feel free to take if you'd like. They're very cute.
And while you're grabbing a sticker, if you would like to help Mohai, provide the best in public programming and history education for adults like yourself, please feel free to take a survey. It would really help us out, and you will be entered to win a raffle prize. Hey. And come back next month for our final History Cafe of the year, third Wednesday of November, I believe the 20th. And that topic will be Indigenous Voices on the Air.
All right.
All right. Thank you again, and have a great night, everyone.